Thanks, Joe. First of all, yeah, I was here 2 years ago at 10X, and I just have to big thank you to Joe for what he does. It was during my transition back then, and it was really helpful to be here and meet people, and it was great. So over the past couple of days, I've heard a lot of themes that probably wondering, well, how is this going to give you some direct input into what you can really be thinking about what you're doing? And there were a few themes about awareness, patient engagement, and data that I felt I could bring out in a short 10-minute discussion on the use of medical devices in the diabetes industry. For those of you who don't know, Dexcom is actually based here in San Diego. It's actually a medical device company that was founded in 1999. Their first commercial sensor came out in 2006. And keep that in mind because that's a very interesting date when you think that we're 11 years from when that first hit the market and some of the things that I'll be talking about. Although they're based in San Diego right here, I'm fortunate enough to get to visit down here because my office is up in Portland. We have a Portland Software Center of Excellence. The weather's not quite so nice, but it's still a great place to be, and I really enjoy it up there. And there's a lot of there. I think there's many other people from the Pacific Northwest who are here as well. For those who, let me ask the question, how many of you know what CGM is, or continuous glucose monitoring for the diabetes industry? Okay, well, that's a good number of hands. I'm actually surprised. I asked that question because many endocrinologists and many doctors out there today still don't know of this technology. I run into people all the time who have diabetes, and they ask what I do, and I talk about it, and they say, I've never heard of that. And so that gets into the awareness side of what we do. It's really important that we recognize that as technologies move fast, there are people that are not aware of it, they don't know about it, and how do we get that word out in a way that makes them interested in it and want to be aware of it and use it. So part of what we, that I'm going to get to on our approval really aims towards that. So this is what a continuous glucose monitor is. It's actually, you can just barely see it here. There's a little tiny thread coming out of the bottom of that sensor. That actually goes in underneath the skin. You use an inserter to put it on. You put it on yourself. And then there is a little Bluetooth transmitter that transmits to either a receiver or to a phone. And basically it gives you readings every 5 minutes. You can see the little graph on there. Every 5 minutes about what your glucose levels are. And that's really important because the previous way that diabetics would really learn about where they were at with their glycemic control would be by doing finger sticks. And finger sticks is like taking a picture versus watching a movie. You just know what's happening at that one instant, but you don't know at any other time. And there's a lot that goes on in the body with your glycemic control, even if you're not diabetic. I've actually worn the device myself, learned a lot about my eating habits, what goes on, and what I should and shouldn't eat, even though I'm not diabetic. And believe me, when you drink that big gulp at 7-Eleven, you can really see what happens to your blood sugar levels. But one of the great things is that you also get direction arrows that tell you what direction your blood glucose is going, as well as alarms and alerts. So you can set those to alert you if you're getting to a point where you really need to know about it. So it's a great device. Like I said, not every doctor even knows about these things. This is kind of an overall picture, and I just wanted to show you kind of the overall picture of the system because we talk about classifications of different medical devices, and we hit on all of them. The sensor stuff that you just saw in the last picture is all Class 3 medical device. We have what's called a follow-app. This is a Class 2 device. This is actually something that allows a parent or caregiver to monitor how their child or someone else is doing at school while they're at home. I mean, it's so important for parents. They worry all the time. They worry overnight. We've had parents tell us that they've slept through the night for the first time in 15 years because they haven't had to go wake up their child and prick their finger and see what their blood sugar level is. So things like that are really, important about what we can deliver here. And then what I work on is the Class 1 medical device software, which is therapy management software that the doctors use to look at the data coming out of the device retrospectively to see what's happened in the last couple of weeks, what's happened in the last month, compare it from different time frames, look at how their treatment has basically impacted this patient who's wearing the device. Now, these classifications change too. There was a time when therapy management software was actually a Class 3 device. Through de novo submissions and other things, working with the FDA, we were able to get reclassification. What's interesting is that the classifications will continue to change based on what you do to that software. Right now, I said it's retrospective software. If we were to decide to, say we take the real-time graph that's in that Class 3 stuff and decide we're going to put it into the Class 1 software, the FDA is not going to let us do that. That's going to change the classification. I'm not saying we're doing that. As a matter of fact, we're not going to do that. But it is just things that happen. There will be other things that we'll put in the software that will change the classification of it. At Class 1, you have Class 1 exempt. You have Class 1 non-exempt. That gets into 510K submissions and things like that. So it can be very different. And so we have very different levels of classifications that we work with within one system, which a lot of people find interesting because some people don't think you can break up a system that you're using when you submit it to the FDA, but you can do that. You can work with different components. So, by the way, I hope I'm not talking too fast. It's 10 minutes is kind of a thing to try to squeeze in here. So let me get to this claim here. The claim that the CGM has had for the past 10 years has basically been this one that says CGM is intended to supplement, not replace, a blood glucose meter. Confirmatory finger stick is required for treatment. So anytime you go out with a new device, and even though it was 10 years ago and it still continued for a long time, some of the ways to get a device into the market is you put things in your instructions for use that talk about what you can and cannot do with it. As a very new technology that even back in 2006, and by the way, Dexcom isn't the only one who makes sensors, there's other companies too, none of them, they all have this same claim to them. Basically what that's saying is that if you're going to dose, take insulin, and you're using a CGM, you still have to do this. You have to take a blood sample, check it with a meter before you dose. That's what the FDA, what we put in our claims and others have in order to allow this product to get to market. Because it's still a great product that people can learn a lot from as you watch what happens with your glycemic control during the day. There's a lot that goes on. So we felt many years ago this was totally acceptable to have this as part of the intended use of the product. But it does create, some issues. So what happened is, well, first of all, what's a non-adjunctive claim? That basically is just the opposite of what I just said. If you have this claim, it's telling your user you can treat off of this. And some of the ways that you get there, obviously, is the technology's been improving, but even when the technology improves, how do you get a change like this to happen? And last year, July 21st, was a very interesting day. The diabetes community had an advisory panel with the FDA. Many months of preparation went into this, and we basically, it was really interesting to watch it be live streamed from our offices and listen to what was going on, but it was really a very, very interesting day to listen. And what happened there? Well, at the panel discussion, we had a lot of healthcare providers. They were there telling their stories of how CGM helps their patients. We had a lot of advocacy groups from the diabetes industry. JDRF, Diatribe, others were there. They all talked about how it was used. But probably the biggest one was the patient engagement. There were over 30 presentations done that day by patients talking about how they use CGM, why they believe it should be able to have this new labeling to it, why they dose off of it. I mean, the bottom line is people were doing it for a long time anyways. You can't, as you all know with medical devices, even when you have a certain level of intended use, there will be people that use it off-label. The challenge is you can't usually talk about it. So, but we knew it was going on. Patients were very free to talk about it to the FDA and talk about what they were doing, but as companies that release products, you can't do that. So what happened was, at the end of the day, they actually voted. The 10-person panel voted 8-2 on the safety of making this change and 9-1 on the effectiveness. Don't ask me who the one was who thought it was effective but not safe. Can't figure out why that's 8-2 and a 9-1, but there was one member of the panel that went the other way on that. And eventually that led to the FDA allowing us to change the labeling on this. So it was a very exciting thing for the industry. And so I just want to mention briefly, because we've talked a lot about patient engagement, patients in the diabetes industry are very engaged with their disease state and what they do. And people with diabetes, it's a very self-managed disease. Unlike a lot of other disease states where you're told, you got to take some medication, take it in the morning or take it at night, and you got to do this every 3 days and stuff. That's kind of a regimen that people would just do. A diabetic, I had one diabetic tell me once that you never take a day off from your diabetes. You're thinking about it all the time, every day, because everything you do affects your body, and if one day you do say you do the same thing every day for 3 days, and the fourth day you do the exact same thing, but you run before lunch. That's going to change what you take as far as insulin goes for that meal, things like that. So they're very engaged every day with what goes on. Stress impacts their diabetes. Foods impact it. There's a whole bunch of things that impact it, and they're always thinking about those things. People with diabetes are also very engaged in other ways. Social networking. You'll find there's a tremendous amount of engagement on the web with people talking about things. They compare foods, they compare what they do, they compare treatments. They're also very engaged in getting into their devices. I know 2 years ago at this conference, there was someone who talked about the hacking of an insulin pump. I'm not talking about that type of hacking. That was kind of the security, black hat type of hacking that goes on. But there's a lot of groups and people that recognize that they can take their device, they can take the data out of it, they can write their own app, and they can track their own things and do all their own stuff. And they try to do that, and there's numerous groups that have been doing that for some time. There's the Night Scout group, hashtag We Will Not Wait, because they were complaining about the slowness that it was taking the industry to accept a lot of the mobile stuff that was going on. So they're very, very engaged, and that's something that we as medical device companies have to be very aware of and really use in the work that we do, and meet with those groups, meet with patients. The human factors discussion that we just had is very important because they are people that are really out using the devices in many ways, and they will comment, on the web about your device. It's a very commercial, personal product when you get into diabetes, unlike a lot of the other medical devices that we'll talk about at a conference like this. It's really something that people use daily, and they change how they use it, and they will comment frequently and often on the web. We put out a release of our software a couple of weeks ago, the Clarity software, and instantly there were comments on the blogs about it. So it doesn't take long for your medical device to start having comments when you're in an industry where it's very personal, which is, like I said, different than if you're working with some other types of products. And then they want their data. We've talked in this conference over the last couple of days about data. And data is an area that is also very prominent in what we do. People want their data. They want to see it. Now, there's always those that don't, and that's always something to consider, but it's amazing, those who are engaged, how much they want to see their data, and they want to bring that data together with other pieces of data. But the problem is when you really start collecting all that, you get into what I call sensory overload. What do I do with all this data? I've got so much data, I don't know. And what we'll do is we'll put together charts and graphs and different things to provide to the doctors and the patients. But this is old school. This has been going on for 10 years. People have been always showing the basic statistics and things like that. What we need to do as a medical device industry is do better. And again, it's something that's been talked about a little bit here, is that we need to bring together all the different data sources. In the diabetes industry, all the wellness apps, the Fitbit data, things like that are all interesting aspects of a person's daily life that can be used to talk about, what are you doing next? How does this impact you? How does that food impact you if you're running and things like that? We need to make data actionable. When we're giving charts and reports to doctors, we want to be sure that we're not just throwing data out at them. We want them to be able to look at that data and say, oh, I see there's something here that I can talk to my patient about. So that's very important. And lastly, what we want to do is we want to improve outcomes. It's all about making people better. So it's really important that we look at the way we're presenting data in ways that get to that ultimate goal, because without it, we're not there. Am I getting short on time?
You're good.
Okay. So really, just in conclusion, see Joe's getting up, a question, and actually I'll ask myself this question: why is it important that we got this approval? If you're thinking, well, people already were using it off-label, they were dosing off of it, why is this important? Well, there's really 3 reasons. One is patient and doctor awareness. If they know you're allowed to do something with a product, they're more willing to accept it. And that's something that's very important in this industry, that they accept the products. Look, 2006, it's been 11 years since the first sensor device came out. People still are not aware of it. They still don't trust it. They still don't really use some of the technologies that we develop in these rooms. Number two is the training. I mentioned that you can't talk about something that's off-label. How do you talk to someone about what you could do with the information they're getting if it's not part of your labeling? So it allows better education. The last thing is, if anyone's familiar with Medicare, Medicare will not cover a device that's adjunctive. If a sensor is considered just, you can use it, but you still have to finger stick, they won't cover it. Well, the great news is that in January of this year, Medicare is now covering CGM for tens of thousands of patients. And that is huge because it's really a life-saving device that many people need that they couldn't get access to. So that's probably one of the biggest reasons to get a labeling change like this, is so that you can get that kind of coverage and make a difference in people's lives.